And welcome everyone to Main Street Books virtual gathering space. My name is Beth and I'm the events manager at Main Street Books. And that means that one of my hats that I get to wear is welcoming local writers to share about their work and to share about their process as writers and to connect with each other as a part of our Monday Night Spotlight series. This is a new program this year and it has been really fun and particularly rewarding for me to get to know some of our local talent. Tonight, it's twofold because we have talented writers, illustrators, and we also have experts in their fields that I'm so excited to share with you all and for you to hear directly from. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our crew. I'll start with Forrest. Forrest, I didn't ask you how you pronounce your last name. I'm sorry, that was my error. Can you say it for me?
Yeah, it's Brazeal, Forrest Brazeal.
Brazeal, like the country with a really thick accent.
Yeah.
Forrest Brazeal is a cloud architect, and you'll have to read his book to really understand what that means. He's been in the tech industry for over a decade. He's installed software updates during a live cataract surgery and designed robots that perform machine learning on pizza, all without losing his witty trademark sense of humor. His webcomics about life in the cloud reach hundreds of thousands of readers and have been cut up, tacked up, reshared, and PowerPointed at workplaces from Disney to Google. He also speaks at public and private events around the world on the business and technology of cloud computing. The Read Aloud Cloud, An Innocent's Guide to the Tech Inside, is his first book. Forrest holds a master's degree in computer science from Georgia Tech and a postgraduate certificate in nonsense from wherever Dr. Seuss did his doctorate. There are definitely Dr. Seuss nods in this particular tome. He's a senior manager at a cloud guru, and he lives right here in Davidson, North Carolina, with his wife, 2 children, and an unmanageable collection of old books, which we cannot see in his background, unlike my YA fantasy. But I'm gonna take your word for it that it's there with you somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere.
Welcome, Forrest. The Read Aloud Cloud itself, which you'll hear a little bit more about from him, is an explanation of the cloud for people like me, who really know nothing and still don't quite feel like I know much of anything. But it's a go-to fun gift for engineering students. It's a cubicle conversation starter or a delightfully nerdy bedtime story for kids. I can say that has been tested and approved at my house. The Read Aloud Cloud is the definitive introduction to technologies that everybody uses and no one really understands. He jokes that you can read it silently if you want, but good luck with that. It does beg to be read aloud. So, Forrest, so glad you're here.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here, Beth.
Moving on, next up, I have Lori Epting. Hi, Lori.
Hi, Beth.
Lori is owner of Lori Epting Counseling. She's a licensed clinical mental health counselor in Charlotte, North Carolina, specializing in marital therapy. She is formally trained in the professionally accepted and empirically validated treatment model of emotionally focused couples therapy, also known as EFT. Before she settled in Charlotte, she attended UNC Chapel Hill and graduated from the Keenan Flagler Business School and received her master's in counseling from Arizona State University. She began her career at the Psychological Counseling Services in Scottsdale, Arizona, one of the nation's leading treatment programs, but found her niche working with couples. In addition to counseling couples at her practice, Lori is a topic expert for goodtherapy.org, where she contributes articles about relationships. Lori also helps couples navigate the chaos of modern marriage at her professional blog, marriagesense.org. Lori resides down the road in Charlotte with her perfectly chaotic family, her husband, Chad, their 2 daughters, and their hyperactive puppy. And if any of them move through the room during this event, we totally understand.
It's very possible.
I was joking earlier off camera that this was a very timely read for me. This is her book, From Chaos to Connection, a marriage counselor's candid guide for the modern couple, especially navigating a family of 7 during a pandemic that put us in our 3-bedroom house for hundreds of days on end. In this book, she calls out the main culprit of marital woes as this universal state of busyness or chaos that impacts all of our lives. Almost all families find themselves drowning in this chaos. Arming couples with the proper skills and tools to combat the most common marriage issues, the book guides them away from division and chaos and onto the same team so that their marriage serves as their main refuge and place of comfort amidst the chaos. The guide is steeped in empirically validated couples treatment models, but delivered in a lighthearted and candid manner with a touch of humor so that the advice is always relatable and can be applied immediately. Case in point. Lori, we're so glad that you are here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom in this particular book. I appreciate that all of them have humorous moments and undertones, all three of these books. Welcome, Lori.
Thanks for having me, Beth.
And finally, Dr. Laura, and I didn't ask you, is it Happe or Happy?
It's Happe.
Happy. Perfect. Dr. Happe, who is a doctorate of pharmacy and an MPH, is a pharmacist, a researcher, and an educator who uses data to help people make better decisions. As an executive leader in the pharmacy and insurance industries, Laura has developed new businesses and strategies, including the opioid epidemic response at a Fortune 50 healthcare company. Laura is chief editor of the peer-reviewed Journal of Managed Care and Specialty Pharmacy and a professor at the University of Florida and Wingate University. She lives with her husband down the road in Cornelius, where they teach their kids that happiness, see the play on words now, is a choice. Her book, which also has fun illustrations, is a play on the classic, if you give a mouse a cookie, but it is if you give an ox an oxy. Remember the sequence of events. If you give a mouse a cookie, it leads ultimately to disaster. If you give an ox an oxy, adolescents meet an ox who takes a prescription medication called an opioid. They follow him as he goes from taking a few opioids to overusing them and finally becoming addicted, learning about treatment for addiction, and ultimately how dangerous taking illegal opioid drugs can be. It is an accessible breakdown of an epidemic that is, of course, something that the nation is grappling with. So welcome to you, Dr. Happe.
Thanks.
All right, we've got one folk in, there we go, perfect. Oh, I see our fellow bookseller and editor, Andrea, here. Hi, Andrea. Excellent. So I'm so glad you all are here. We're gonna give each of you a chance to read a little bit from your books, but I'd like to just start with a question. So I'll start with you, Forrest. I know that this is not new to you, comic book illustration and developing these comics. The history behind this book seems to be that you started launching and sharing these little silly comics that you were doing. Can you talk a little bit about the moment that you realized you had something here that was shareable, that people really wanted to experience, and when it sort of evolved from a side project into the book that it is?
Sure, thanks, Beth. What I've learned, and I've been in technology for a long time, is that there's a real lack of, friendly, humorous, relatable ways to engage with that technology, right? We can all get a little glazed over, and that goes for people who are new to the industry as well as people who've been doing it for years and years, can all just feel a little bit overwhelmingly technical at times. So early on in my career, I actually was sitting in a cubicle at a huge, enormous enterprise software company. I was going to the copy machine down the hall and drawing things in black Sharpie marker and scanning them in and printing them out just to try to liven the boredom, kind of a Dilbert-esque scenario. And at some point I started putting those on the internet and they kind of blew up. And at one point, the cartoon series that was called Fast and Furious was viewed by hundreds of thousands of regular readers around the world through a partnership with a cloud education company called A Cloud Guru, and continues to be shared around the world today. It's been included in a number of books and all that sort of thing. But I think what it shows is just that there's that value, right, for people in trying to connect and engage with technology through a way that's a little bit quirky and non-traditional. And at some point we said, hey, we should turn this into a book. And so it's out now from Wiley Publishing, which are, of course, the For Dummies people. And I think it fits in really well with the rest of that line of products.
It does. You mentioned Dilbert. Were you a fan prior?
Yeah, I've been drawing cartoons since I was just a little kid, and I have a shelf here in my office that has Dilbert and has Kelvin and Hobbes and Peanuts and Pogo and all those old comic strips on it. And those things are timeless because they speak to us, right, in a way that you're not necessarily going to find with just another boring paragraph. There's humor and whimsy in those little simple pictures that just sticks with you, and that's why people cut them out and tack them up on their fridges and in their cubicle walls. And really, I think that's the greatest testament to something like that. If people will gravitate toward it and share it, right? The internet just makes that so much easier to understand when those things are getting traction and when they're relatable to people.
Totally. Do you have a particular strip or topic that you find gets shared the most, like that gains the most traction? Do you have a most popular?
I think there's a few different things. What always stands out is when you create something that resonates with a problem or a difficulty that people are experiencing. So if I'm talking to software developers and we talk about what does it feel like to have a bug, right? To be stuck beating your head against something for hours and hours and troubleshooting it. And at one moment think, I'm in the wrong career, I'm never going to be able to solve this. And the next moment you say, oh, I missed one character, in a long line of text and now everything's working again. And that sudden shift from despair to euphoria is something that everyone can relate to. And so when you're able to capture that in a visual way, in a funny way, it seems to really resonate with people.
Yes, totally. And I have to just point out, and I don't know if you'll be able to, as you're reading for us, share the delightful illustrations. Do you have a favorite character?
I'm really there. That's the
this little guy.
Yeah. There you have the little magician who's working in the
behind
cloud.
the curtain.
There's one page, I think, in the next chapter that's here, and I've got a copy on my lap as well. The guy who accidentally digs up the internet cable with the backhoe, and I've always been partial to that picture because I think we've all there he is. The natural enemy of the data center is the guy in the backhoe, and yeah.
Oh yeah, there he is.
Yeah. So
cool. All right. Well, we'll be back with you in just a minute to actually have you read aloud from the Read Aloud cloud. But I'm going to move on to Lori. So Lori, you've created this book that offers almost universal advice. I can already say personally that there's a lot that resonated with me. Can you talk about the process of sort of moving from this very individualized work that you do with particular couples who are facing particular challenges, and crafting it into universal, accessible advice? Can you just talk about at what point did you know that you had sort of these pieces that floated to the top, and then also can you talk about any breakthroughs that happened as you went through the process of creating those universal pieces of advice?
Yeah, I would say kind of the moment that it all culminated for me was after I had my second child. And so I was going through just, the chaos of it all myself, of a 3-year-old, a baby, trying to work, manage all the things, the laundry, a marriage. So I was going through it all at the same time that I had couple after couple after couple coming and sitting on my couch, going through, drowning in the same stuff. So it was kind of just a really profound experience to be counseling folks and the same kind of issues you're having yourself. And so what I started to notice, and I definitely paid attention, because when you're in something and somebody else is in the same thing, you definitely pay attention. What I started to notice is that partners were saying the same things over and over and over again. I mean, there would be days that just sitting on my couch, I'd have the same husband say the same words 3 times over. or the same words from their wife. And it just started to really dawn on me that these are also normal. These are problems that exist in marriages like around the world. And they are really fixable. And something I had that, my couples didn't have is hours and hours and hours and hours of couples training. And so the thing that kind of dawned on me is that I can walk myself through these issues. I can definitely, I'm in them too, but I knew how to get out. I know how to stay connected. I know how to kind of approach things with my husband to get through it, because I've been very, very trained in all of that. And so I wanted to offer that to just beyond the people that could walk into my office. And I wanted to be very personal. I didn't want to be the expert, like sitting on my expert throne of I've got this all figured out. I wanted to be kind of in the same boat with them, but with the knowledge that I have. And so it kind of came out really quick. Once the ideas started churning, it came out really quick on paper, or on my computer, and sometimes at 2 a.m. because when do you have time to write when you've got little kids? That's a fairly impossible feat sometimes. And so it came out really quickly, but what over time, over kind of that year of completing it all, I could add to it. I could sit with my couples and just really kind of listen intently about the specific nuances that show up in these same patterns, and just really kind of enriching the book with more anecdotes and more examples that make it really hopefully relatable. I have definite, readers who say, how did you get into my head? How do you know what I'm thinking? And I'm like, well, that's because it's not specific to you. Those are thoughts and feelings that are had by so many different people. So that was kind of that process. And I think you asked about breakthroughs.
Yeah. So just, when you're teaching, essentially you also are doing really deep learning. And so were there things that you ultimately learned or breakthroughs that you had in your counseling work, or in your own life through the process of writing the book?
I think, well, it made me a better therapist for sure, because when you're writing it down and really trying to organize your thoughts and thinking about how do I truly help a couple go through their issues into an improvement place, like you have to really think hard about what you're doing and how do I explain it to somebody so they can apply it at home. So I definitely think it taught me a lot as a therapist. But I tell even couples in my office, if you want to, you just scrap everything and read one chapter of my book, chapter 2, which is about empathy. And there was times in writing this that I thought about, should I just make the whole daggone book about empathy? Like that's kind of the game changer. But as I thought through that, people that read it let me know that it's woven in through the entire book over and over and over again. But that's probably the biggest thing I learned, just how super game changing that skill is. And it is a skill. I think we all like to think we're just so empathetic and so validating just in our nature. But typically we really have to learn how to do that in a way that helps people close to us feel heard and understood and validated, and to feel like kind of we're in it with them. And so I think that was kind of my biggest takeaway. And I might have a revised version at some point, or might have a round 2 that's all about that as well. But that's probably the biggest takeaway for me.
That's great. Thank you. And we'll be back with you shortly for an excerpt. I'm going to move on to Laura. I'm sorry, I just have to keep calling you Dr. Happe.
Tell me more.
It's great. So obviously this is a really serious issue. You have chosen to distill it and break it down in ways that it's not totally light. There's meaty stuff in here. But the framework itself, is sort of a play on a playful story. What's your hope for the role that this particular book plays in the broader conversation about opioid use and abuse? And also, as an expert in the field, I'm really just interested in hearing your thoughts on what a multi-pronged vision for how we address this looks like, what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Beth. So I think just big picture, the book is written for the preteen to early teen age group. And the idea behind it is to give parents an inroad to talk to their kids about this difficult topic. And some of the statistics around the frequency at which parents do or don't talk about it are staggering. So in my research for the book, I learned that about 14% of parents actually talk to their kids about prescription drug abuse. And as a pharmacist, that's not enough for me. And so that's my hope. That's what I'm trying to change. And then what I'm also the way I'm trying to do that is to make it not to be such a scary or awkward conversation, right? I mean, we all remember like the awkward conversations we had with our own parents, right? So I mean, like I learned about the birds and the bees when my cat got pregnant, right? And it was like they sat my brother and I down on the couch and we had this one isolated discussion about the birds and the bees because the cat was pregnant and that was the end of it, right? And we needed a lot more than that, right? So I'm trying, like, I feel like as a parent, I'm trying to, and I have bought several books to talk with our kids about different topics. And what I want to do is like, unveil the mystery, just make it more conversational, not something that's isolated and taboo that you only talk about once. And so I mean, just sort of the idea of doing this parody of this book that all our kids grew up with, this series of if you give a mouse a cookie, if you give a moose a muffin, they all kind of know the story. And it just occurred to me that the storyline of those books follow the storyline of addiction, right? So it's consequences. That's what those books are, and they're all cyclical. And so whatever the character starts out with, they kind of come back to, which is kind of what I ended up using for the basis of the story for the book. And as you said, it is not, it's light, but it's also heavy, right? So I followed the storyline of the existing books, but then I supplemented every page with statistics and information that can be used as a dialogue between parents and their children or adults and adolescents about the risks of opioids. And you kind of just asked also, I want to comment on the question about, the multi-pronged approach, right? So, I mean, my expertise is not per se in educating adolescents. My expertise is in opioids in general. In fact, my expertise and my experience has been quite the opposite of that. So when I was working on the opioid epidemic, I was working for a Medicare population, so an elderly population, and how do we solve those problems with opioid overprescribing and opioid overuse with the elderly population. And so I think that just kind of illustrates that, how we got into this situation was a multifaceted, several causes kind of got us here, and several solutions are going to be required to get us out of it. And it's actually changed a lot over the course of the last decade. Prescription opioid abuse really kind of peaked around 2011. And now we've kind of shifted because we've really reined back, as the healthcare profession, we've reined back on opioid prescribing and access to opioids. And so now we've really switched back into those illicit opioids, street opioids that are kind of the current problem, more so than the prescription opioids. So, I describe it like a balloon, you squeeze it over here, it's going to pop out somewhere else, so it absolutely is this multi-pronged approach. And so I think the concept of talking to our kids early is probably one of the most important things to set the stage for reducing future problems. Our school systems can only do so much, and our kids rely on us to have those difficult conversations. And so I'm just trying to make it easier for us as parents to have those conversations.
Well, yes, as the mom of a 12-year-old, I say thank you, because it does. I learned a lot myself, and I appreciated I mean, it is interesting. Your book and Forrest's book, though, very different. I just have a lot of appreciation for the way that you took really complicated, heady stuff and were able to sort of distill it to more accessible deposits. So thank you. Speaking of, I'm going to transition back over to Forrest to give us a little bit of a taste of the Read Aloud Cloud. So sit back and enjoy.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Well, look, we mentioned that the book is written almost entirely in rhyme. There are some little prose sections at the end of the chapter called "Word to the Nerd," which are kind of extra credit reading. And we already talked about Dr. Seuss. A lot of the chapters use kind of that traditional doggerel rhyme scheme. But there's some other chapters that explore other kinds of rhyme as well. There's an Edgar Allan Poe homage in one of the chapters. And the chapter I'm going to read to you now actually plays with the kind of poetry, doggerel poetry, that you might be familiar with if you know the work of Ogden Nash, who's one of my favorite doggerel poets. And what Ogden Nash would do is he would set up a rhyme, and then he'd have this corresponding line that would just go on and on and on. You never knew where it was going to end. And so the actual, when the rhyme would occur, that was kind of a punchline in and of itself, just to see where he was going to end that sentence. And this chapter of the book is called Resilience, How the Cloud Stays Up. So it's all about failure. It's all about unpredictable things happening. So listen for those rhymes, listen for where the sentences end, and maybe that'll help all this get pulled together. All right, so chapter 5, Resilience, How the Cloud Stays Up. Look, even the cloud isn't perfectly flawless. Computer equipment is scurvy and lawless. The switches and drives in these glistening rows may fail, and fail hard, and that's just how it goes. The software that runs the cloud might have a bug. The janitor might slip and trip on a plug. A shark might chow down on a key network link. The point is, the cloud's not as up as you think. Failures can be contagious, so please be advised. The rhyme and meter as we proceed may break down or become significantly compromised. The cloud uses a model called shared responsibility. The cloud provider takes care of the physical facility to the best of their ability. If a power cable fails or a hard drive should die, cloud data centers have redundant systems waiting on standby to save your application from an outage that would cause your customers to exhibit elevated levels of poutage. And we're going to skip the little inset here and we'll just move on with the flow. They will also detect and replace failed hardware, whether underground or chest high, with efficiency and zest. It exceeds anything you could do if you had to go order the parts yourself from Best Buy. Sometimes, not often, but often enough that you have to keep track though, an entire data center is brought down by its natural enemy, the dreaded backhoe. So, clouds are built from multiple data centers grouped close enough to minimize network latency, but far enough apart to avoid the possibility that they could get hit by the same runaway truckload of saxophones. And these clusters of data centers are called availability zones. Could an entire availability zone go down? There's a small likelihood. Like if the power grid failed, which it certainly could, that would not be good. We'll skip that other inset as well. So cloud availability zones are organized further into regions, corresponding to large geographical areas like the Kingdom of the Norwegians. And should an entire region go down due to an earthquake or worse, some radical dissolution of socio-political allegiance, you could just use another region of which there are legions. And after all that, if your app falls over and comes to a crashing halt, I'm sure you'll agree with the cloud provider that it's really your own fault for not embracing the Gestalt. A well-built cloud app doesn't use just one server. It spreads out its work to be safe even further across many servers in multiple zones, so though one may go down, they won't all die at once. If a whole region dies, then your app can fail over and run in another like server Red Rover. That kind of resilience, mixed with agility, greatly sought after, is high availability. If failover fails, to your great consternation, you're in a disaster recovery situation, and you'd better just hope you have backups on hand to help with the careful restores that you planned. You must test your backups. If not, you have sinned, and your customers' data is lost in the wind. With the cloud handling hardware and us building apps, a new kind of system lands right in our laps. A scalable, failable, nigh unassailable, can't take it down because it's highly available cloud application that thrives under pressure. If that doesn't get you excited, then bless you. In closing, and this barely needs to be said, the resiliency of the cloud is a massive improvement on the old way of doing things, which sometimes amounted to running your business from a server that you kept in a pile of dust bunnies under your bed. And that's the end of the chapter.
Thank you. Let me give you a round of applause. It's a mouthful. I love it. I was trying to show off some of your illustrations. I particularly like this stumpy guy right here. Hard at work.
Yes.
So that's a taste of the read aloud cloud. It's so funny you mentioned Edgar Allan Poe, because I did when I was first flipping through it and I saw an character and I said, oh, that looks like Edgar Allan Poe. So can you just sort of name any other rhyme heroes that you pulled from? You've named 3 already.
Yes. So we talked about Dr. Seuss. We talked about Ogden Nash. We talked about Edgar Allan Poe, of course. And there's several others that are, I mean, you think about the great doggerel poets of the 20th century, even some of the children's poets like John Ciardi and Jack Prelutsky and people like that. You'll pick up on some of that in some of these chapters. And there's even within some of these folks like Dr. Seuss, he'll have this thing he does in certain of his books, like The Grinch is a great example, where it's this very consistent A-B rhyme scheme. And sometimes when he wants to emphasize something, he'll just throw an extra line in with the same rhyme. So you'll see places where there's homages to some of that.
I love that. Well, I mean, as a former English teacher, to know that there's a techie out there who is drawing comics and also borrowing from doggerel rhyme schemes is very exciting to me. So that's really cool.
It's humble work, but someone has to do it.
How long did this take you?
So of course, with a nonfiction book like this, you'll typically write the proposal and sell it before you actually write the book. So the proposal sold in September or August of 2019. And then the book itself was written mostly between October and March. It finished up around the time the pandemic was really getting going. And then it was on store shelves in September of 2020. So about a year all told from conception to actually seeing it on the shelf.
That's really exciting. And that's, and you did it all, illustrations and text too.
Yes, of course. Yeah. There's a great team of editors at Wiley, and this book would not exist without them. This is an unusual book. It's more colorful than a lot of technical books that are out there. Mm-hmm. It was great to work with them. They did a great job.
That's very cool. And my last question is, so you were among the class of 2020 who published a book in the pandemic. Has it impacted the experience of publishing a book? Has it gone maybe as it would have? What did it feel like?
I feel like the most different part, honestly, is something like this, with us sitting here virtually on a call, not able to see each other in the same room. So this feels a lot different. Writing a book, though, and the other authors on the call, I'm sure would agree with this. It's a very lonely process at times and can feel very isolating. And so in some ways, it was great practice for the pandemic.
Yes, led you right into it. Right when you were coming up for air in March.
There you go.
The world said no.
Exactly.
Yes. Do you have any future seeds of future rhyming books in your mind or other kinds of books?
I regretted this so many times after starting it. I do not recommend that you try to condense cloud computing into 160 pages of rhymes. And I'm very sorry that I tried. So this is probably a one-off, but we'll see what happens in the future.
Sounds good. I feel like if anybody can do it, you could take it on. Well, thank you, Forrest. And we'll come back to you with one last question in just a little bit, but I'm going to turn it to Lori to read a little bit from her book, From Chaos to Connection.
All right, I'm going to start right at the beginning. As a marriage counselor, I can sit in a room with a screaming couple and not break a sweat. I can listen with ease to arguments over who's been more wronged, who isn't being appreciated, and who didn't remember to let the dog out last night. I eagerly sit on the edge of my seat without so much as a heart palpitation as a spouse rants about the failings of their partner. However, if you want to spike my blood pressure and put me into a cold sweat, ask me to be the room mom for my 2-year-old's preschool class and arrange a Pinterest-worthy Valentine's Day party, complete with cutesy cards for her classmates who can't even read yet. You could watch the shame creep over me as I scour blogs and pins for respectable ideas while ignoring my husband's third request to come to bed already. I'll be the first to say it. Modern marriage is for the birds. Take me back to the days of my parents when there was no internet and no expectation of themed birthday parties complete with hashtags. Take me back to the days before there was a photographer's package for every holiday and beautifully touched up pictures that get posted on every single social media site and make the rest of us feel subpar about our marriages and families. Take me back to the days when couples could just be at the top of their parenting game just by checking their kids' report cards at the year's end and attending a PTA meeting every now and then. Take me back to the days when a person could just grab a few McDonald's Happy Meals without feeling like they're poisoning their family. Are we seriously supposed to stay happily married with our union securely intact through all this insanity? Modern marriage is crazy. Let me start by sharing one of my favorite crazy moments, the kind that can make or break any marriage. It was a Saturday morning. Saturday mornings are a perfect time for me to work as a marriage counselor because my husband, Chad, is home to wrangle the kids. I can get myself ready, distraction-free and out the door in a peaceful manner. Every mom's dream. Now, this particular Saturday, I had arranged for my daughter's favorite babysitter to come over after an hour so that my husband could play in a friendly neighborhood tennis match. At 6:30 a.m., the alarm clock went off and he was out the door. I took a quick shower before my 2-year-old and 5-year-old woke up. Once they were up, I turned on Doc McStuffins so I could blow dry my hair and get dressed. I put out some breakfast and a change of clothes for the kids. The clock was ticking, but no babysitter. I thought, maybe I told her to come at 8:30 instead of 8:15. I checked my text messages. Nope, I'd actually told her 8 o'clock. It was 8:35. In exactly 25 minutes, my clients would be sitting in the waiting room at my office and there was still no sign of the babysitter. I called and texted her. I called and texted my husband. No response from anyone. I started to panic. This led to a series of events that ended with my neighbor answering the third of my frantic calls in the middle of her kickboxing class. She proceeded to call her husband and uproot him from his couch, where he was spending a rare kid-free moment with his coffee, to get him to hustle up to my house. When he was within eyeshot, I jumped in my car, headed down the street to my babysitter's house, and banged on her door. Yes, I have no shame. She jumped out of bed and threw on her clothes, and we raced back to my house, where I dropped her at the end of the driveway. As I sped down the road to work, Chad finally called me back. I heard him so innocently say, "Hey babe, I'm in between sets. Did you need something?" I wish I could tell you I used all my education, training, and experience as a marriage counselor to perfectly regain my composure and say, "I'm all good. It was a bit crazy, but I got it all worked out. Enjoy the rest of your match." But no. The real ending to this story is that I laid into my husband with such theatrics that I might now be up for a Golden Globe Award. Seconds after getting off the phone, he emailed me the confirmation number for a 2-hour massage he had scheduled for me later that day. I'm not sure if this was his way of saying, "Sorry you had such a tough morning," or "I'm willing to pay hundreds of dollars for you to relax at a spa in the hopes that you don't come home still acting like a crazy person." Married life with kids is chaos.
Thank you. I'm glad you picked that because I do think one of the reasons that your book is so accessible is because you're open about your own life and struggles. And I'm wondering if there was any part of it or that was more difficult to write, or that you decided to include or not include based on input from your own partner.
I definitely had to run all stories past him before I put it out for the world to see for sure. And we're pretty open people, and I really wanted to kind of weave in my own experience with my clients. And so I definitely handpicked things that I felt like people could relate to. I didn't feel like it was oversharing about my own life, but it could really kind of paint a picture for folks about what kinds of things can pop up and how normal it is and how to work through them. I'll definitely say the last chapter I wrote was the one on sex, and that's the one I dreaded the most because I knew parents were going to be reading it, in-laws were going to be reading it, but I tried to put some things in there that was really, really applicable to kind of the craziness of no time and fatigue and exhaustion and So that was definitely the last part I wrote about.
Part. Yeah. And I just have to ask, because I imagine it has been interpreted or has created some controversy, which is in your experience as a counselor, you find in a heteronormative couple, in a, where you have a male and female partner, that sometimes the woman can be more, or often, or always, the woman can be more critical than the male partner. What is this something that people push back about?
Not so much.
Or do they concede?
And I felt so that there's a chapter in there that you're referring to saying that women are more critical than men. And actually the research backs that up, first of all. And I did expect some pushback, but I felt so convicted that it was such an easy fix in our relationships that can make a profound change. And so I kind of did want to create kind of like that, what are you saying? Because then if you really read through the examples and the chapter, I think that people can really kind of settle into, yeah, I do that. I do criticize in an effort to create change or to ask for something different, or when I need my partner to do something, or I don't like what they're doing, I really do criticize them. And so I did kind of want that jarring kind of wake up. And I test ran it too, past a lot of all my group of friends. And we talked about out of 12, who's the critical one. And it was 10 out of 12, I always have to say. So I felt, again, pretty convicted. But the research does back it up that women are more likely to voice their concerns through criticism.
Yes, I will just be an anecdote of one here, but that is 100% true in my house.
And it's true for me too. I'm not pot calling kettle. I am
right. Right. My last question is just, I know that your professional work is with married couples, but are there nuggets from your book that you feel like are particularly valuable in parenting also?
Yes, nuggets from my book in parenting. So, parents can really get into some traps where kind of the one I talk about a lot in here is the one I see the most, or the one I experience the most. And it's the I do more than you do. No, I don't. I do more than you do. Well, I went to work and did all this. No, but I changed the diapers and did all that. And so parents can really get into what I call kind of a competitive cycle, or as I talk about in the book, my day was harder than yours, or my burdens are bigger. And so that's one of the dynamics I really try to point out and help couples with the most, of how to get out of that dynamic. We all are overwhelmed. We all feel underappreciated. We're all exhausted. And it can be really easy to get into kind of combat or a battle with your partner, when what we really need is our partner to say, that is hard. And I'm so sorry you had a hard day. And I know that was a lot of work. And I know the kids are really tough. And I know your boss is a pain in the rear. Like, we need that empathy and that validation and that compassion.
Mm-hmm. And for our kids too. I think that's been a lesson for me in the past year, is through the pandemic, is just realizing that, I have it hard, but I can acknowledge the challenges that they're facing too, more frequently and more regularly.
Yeah,
it does. It always comes back to empathy.
It comes back to empathy.
It comes back to. Thank you. I'm going to now ask Laura to read a little bit of If You Give an Oxy.
Sure, thanks. Lori, if you could have your husband send my husband the massage therapist number, that would be fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 seconds on If You Give a Moose a Muffin. I know that If You Give a Mouse a Cookie was like V1, right? That's probably the most popular, but this is what I read with my kids. And just to kind of, I feel like, level set us, we have to like start with this. So the author is Laura Numeroff, and it goes like this. If you give a moose a muffin, he'll want some jam to go with it. So you'll bring out some of your mother's homemade blackberry jam. When he's finished eating the muffin, he'll want another, and another, and another. And when they're all gone, he'll ask you to make more. And the story kind of continues with that same sort of storyline. So hence, if you give an ox an oxy. So one thing that I've done in the book is anytime that I have the opportunity to, again, make it a little bit lighthearted of a difficult subject, anytime I can play on the word ox, I do that. So you'll kind of see that in how I start to go through this. And I'm not as talented as Forrest, but thankfully I have friends and colleagues who are. And so I had a friend, Brian Nye, did the illustration. So I just want to give him a shout out. So if you give an ox an oxy, he's going to ask for another. When he takes the oxy, the leg he broke while oxstream biking will feel better. When he takes another, he'll realize that the oxy makes him feel oxalent, like he just won an ox race. He'll feel so oxalent that he'll start taking more and more oxy. He knows that he should stop taking them because his leg has healed, but he can't. He'll take so many that his body will become dependent on oxy. He takes so many oxys that he runs out and he has to ask his doctor for more, and his doctor says no. Since he can't get more from his doctor, he'll ask his friend Bull if he has any extra oxy left over from his shoulder surgery. And the book kind of continues in this same vein. Ox eventually goes into recovery, and then he eventually relapses, which is unfortunately the common story with opioid use disorder. But what I want to just spend a minute here on is on each page, I sort of read the headline on the left side, and then over on the right-hand side, we've got sort of the data and explanation that's more of the meaty things that you can have those conversations with your kids. So this particular page in this part of the story, Ox is asking his friend Bull for some of his leftover medications from when Bull had shoulder surgery. And so I think this is an important point, and the evidence and the statistics that back this up say that 57% of people between 12 and 17-year-olds who misuse opioids actually get them from a friend or family member. So I mean, it's not this situation where they're going out on the street, in some shady neighborhood and buying illicit drugs from drug users. And then 32% of them are misusing opioids that they got as a prescription from their doctor for a legitimate purpose. And a vast minority, only 5%, have gotten their opioids that they've misused from a drug dealer or a stranger. So, I think as we as parents have to take that statistic very seriously, and have those conversations. We have to make sure that they know, if they are to get treated appropriately, and I'm an advocate for appropriate pain treatment for sure, but we need to educate our kids on what that means and how we don't misuse opioids, and that we don't share our medications and we don't take medications from other people. So that's just kind of an example of the heavy part that accompanies sort of the fun part. And kind of like Forrest was saying, trying to distill the cloud into a, however many word book is really difficult. I kind of ran into the same thing with trying to educate teenagers about the risks of opioids. So I included a frequently asked questions, or in this context, I said frequently oxed questions about opioids. So just, some of and the idea is that, you can read this at the end with your kids, and some of the questions are, why can't people stop taking opioids? Why are there so many different names of prescription opioids like morphine, codeine, oxycodone? If prescription medications are so dangerous, is it ever safe to take them? And the answer is yes. it is absolutely safe to take them, but what we need to know is how to do that. What should people do with leftover opioid medications? And so I have a whole kind of section in here to talk to our kids about those topics. So.
That's great. Thank you. One of the questions that I wonder if you could share now, and I actually don't know if it is in your frequently asked questions or not, is do you have advice for parents or young adults who are who've had an injury or who are working with a doctor? What are the good questions that a patient should ask to make sure that the treatment is, like you said, safe and appropriate, and so they feel like they're making an informed decision?
Yeah, I mean, I think just your question of just questioning is a great place to start, right? So, I think the days of practicing medicine of being like very paternal, do what I say and don't ask questions, those are over, right? So I think it's absolutely important that we have those dialogues with our prescribers. I think that, important questions are, do you think that I have any risk factors for becoming dependent or misusing or becoming addicted to this medication, and having an honest dialogue about that? So some of those risk factors might be, if I have a history of some other type of substance abuse, if I haven't told my physician that, then he or she may be less likely to prescribe that medication. And so, having an honest dialogue about what your own tendencies are, what your family history is, I think that's important. Asking your doctor if they've prescribed the minimum amount. So this has definitely changed over the last 10 years, where prescribers and the entire healthcare industry is much more restrictive about what is prescribed. It's rare that you see very liberal prescribing. If you have sort of an outpatient surgery that's relatively minor, you should not expect to get more than 7 days worth of opioid medications. But I think it's a great question to say, is this the minimum amount? Because I don't want to be overtreated. I mean, there's a lot of research from when we were being much more liberal with prescribing that overtreatment did result in a lot of people becoming dependent and taking long-term opioids when it was likely unnecessary.
Thank you. That's really helpful. We are about out of time. I wanted to see if there are any questions from our visitors here tonight with us. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and ask it, or you can type it into the chat. While the audience is thinking of a question, if they might have one, we've sort of talked, Lori's already sort of shared the nugget from her book. I think that the biggest takeaway would be that lesson of empathy. Chapter 2, right?
Chapter 2. Mm-hmm.
Chapter 2. If you can only read one chapter, read chapter 2. Forrest, what's the one nugget you hope that readers take away from your book?
If you only take one thing away from this book, it should be that I'm very bad at drawing fish and trains. But if you take two things away from this book, it should be that the cloud is not just something esoteric out there for technical people to worry about. The cloud is for you. It's for you to build on. And even if you don't want to build on it, it's for you. It's your responsibility to understand it and keep yourself safe.
Thank you. Just today, my dad asked me if I had a VPN, and I said, I do not know what that is, really. I'll get back to you.
There you go.
And Laura, what about from you?
My message is to talk to your kids and teach them that it's not appropriate, or teach them what misusing and abusing prescription medications looks like, and tell them, the harms of doing that. I don't care if you use my book to do it, or just if you find some other way to have that conversation, just have that conversation. I hope that my book might be a way to help you do that. But I mean, it's a problem in our country, and we just need to make sure that we're warning our kids about that, just like we do so many other things.
Great, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Yes. This question's from Trisha. Was the process of getting published or finding a publisher difficult for any of the authors?
I found that process to be exhausting, and writing the book for me was the easier part. Trying to navigate as a first time, trying to navigate the world of publishing. I was kind of in the, you brought up the books for dummies, like how to publish a book for dummies. Like I had to start at the very beginning. What's the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing? And so every step of the way was such a learning process. So that's where all my time really was spent.
It is a lengthy process, for sure.
I mean, I suppose that we all had sort of different experiences, but I think with us all being first-time authors, probably, you know, similarities, and you're just trying to figure it out, right? And I don't know, I mean, in some ways it was kind of energizing and exciting. So that was all part of it, right? Part of doing something new and different. And I'll tell you a story. I really wanted to try to partner with the author of, you know, this book series to see if we could do this together, right? And I was out, I listened to books when I run. I was out for a run and I was listening to Rachel Hollis, somebody help me, Girl Stop Apologizing, I think is the name of the book.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And I was out for a run. I was listening to this chapter where that was, I want to say that was her first book, or maybe it wasn't her first book, but she was talking about her first experience getting published and how she'd been turned down from, like, you know, some astronomical number of publishers. And, but so she finally decided to self-publish her book. And then, like, a year after being self-published, she got a call from a big time publisher and they wanted to give her a, you know, an advance, and they wanted to buy her book, and, you know, and it was like fantastic. I finished my run, I turn off my book, I open my email on my phone, and I get an email that says, I can't partner with you on this. I don't partner with first time authors. And HarperCollins has sunset the series. They're not doing any more series. If you want to do it, you can do it on your own, but I can't do it with you, and you can't do it with HarperCollins. And had I gotten that email at any other time, I might have been like, okay, this was stupid. I'm just going to go back to being a pharmacist, you know. But I just ran with it. I was like, Rachel Hollis has inspired me, and so I just ran with it. Found a publisher, and it's not a big name. It's not a HarperCollins. It's Morgan James, and they've been a good partner for me, and yeah, it's worked.
You find a way.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you all for being here. This has been a treat to know that there are experts from wildly different fields, all of whom were inspired to take all that they know and all that they've learned and find a way to share it with us. And that's such a generous gift. And it is not a small feat to offer that wisdom through a published book. So we're super grateful. So happy to highlight you here at Main Street Books. And yes, all 3 of these books are available in store or on our website. So please come by and pick up your copies today. It's been a treat. Thanks so much, and have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise. Good
Bye.
night.